I'm going to tell you the story about how I saw God when I was a teenager. And I don't want you to feel like I'm telling you you have to believe me. I don't want you to feel like I think that I'm right and everyone else is wrong. I don't want this to be like a pronouncement of like a scientific fact. It was a very impactful experience for me. It shapes everything I see in the world. It shapes my perspective. And so to me, it's real. But I hope you don't feel like I'm telling you that you have to believe me, because I realize this is a personal experience and it's almost impossible to apply to someone else's experience. So this is basically like a case study. There's a possibility that my experience dealing with God directly, it could possibly benefit other people, but I just want to put the story out there. I just want to say what happened and then just let you decide if it's helpful or not. If it's not helpful, that's okay. I don't want to force you to believe anything that doesn't align with your own experience. At the same time, there could be people out there who are open to hearing a new perspective. They don't have an experience with God, or they don't know. And I feel like for those people, there is a chance that my story could help them. Another reason why I feel like it's important to share my story is because I see so many other people talking about God, and I see them doing it in a way that is very uninformed compared to what I have done in my life. Over the past 20 years, I've studied Buddhism, Hinduism. I've actually had an atheist period in my life, so I understand the atheist perspective, and I think it's just as legitimate as any other religious perspective. You know, I've studied Christianity, I've studied Islam, I've studied Confucianism and Egyptian religion, and then finally my favorite, which is Greek philosophy, which is the foundation of Western education with Socrates and Plato. In my opinion, that is an amazing philosophy. We're still trying to catch up to those ideas. I think they are so timeless. And so I've taken all of these different perspectives and I've tried to align those with my own perspective. I feel like I can finally talk about this, and I can talk about it in a way that's informed. I can talk about it in a way that might save you time, so you don't have to go out and search all these different things that I've searched out. You can get the gist of it through my perspective. So I feel like I have something to offer at this point that could save you time. That's the whole point. I want to make this useful for you. If it's not useful, I'm just wasting your time. So I don't want that to happen. I want this to be very effective. And so that brings up the third reason why I want to talk about this, is because my perspective that I've developed, which I call the first faith, it actually worked for me in my life. I didn't have anything to go off of. You know, I lost my own religion, my own faith, and I just started from nothing. And after developing the first faith, I felt like my life improved. I felt like I could start to move forward. It gave me hope. It gave me perspective. And it was a particular perspective that allowed me to just put one foot in the front of the other and just slowly improve my life. And so deep down in my psyche, I feel like this was useful for me and it allowed me to move forward. And so I'm thinking, well, if it was useful for me, it could potentially be useful for other people who don't fit into a particular religion at this time. So if you're happy with Christianity, or if you're happy with Mormonism, you're happy with Buddhism, or you're happy with atheism, keep going. I support you. I don't want to take your time. I don't want to ruin your day. That's not my point. I just want to share it. I feel like it could potentially help people. It could potentially be effective for other people because it was effective for me. So that's what this video is really for. That's the purpose of this video. And now I will go all the way back to when I was 5 years old, and I will tell you the story about how I saw God. So there's one moment when I was 5 years old that kind of sticks in my memory. I was counting rocks in the backyard, and I was like thinking about this idea of infinity. Like, how am I going to count to infinity? You know, you go hundreds and you go thousands. It's like, how am I ever going to get to infinity? Because there's an endless amount of like incremental changes that I have to make in these words that I'm using. And I realized I don't have enough words. I don't have enough sounds with the words and the sounds that they taught me. And like, I need more words and I need more sounds. And so I realized like every single sound that comes out of my mouth, every single thing that I hear, that has to be utilized as a representation of a number. And so I started thinking every sound has to be a number. There's no other way. How else are we going to get to infinity? You have to utilize every single representation, every single symbol that you have in order to get to infinity. So I started to think the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that's a number. I was like, hey, the alphabet is a number, because eventually you're going to have to utilize all those different letters, all those different sounds. If you really want to count to infinity, the alphabet is a number. We have to use it as a symbol. We have to use everything we have. So I went in and I told my family, I'm like, hey, I think the alphabet is a number. And that's when I realized nobody cares. I was taught about God in a very structured way. It was like, this is what happened in the 1800s, then this, then this, then this, then this, and that's God, and that's who you have to pray to. And Jesus is an intermediary between you and God, period, end of story. And I was like, okay, but what if I want to like question it? What if I want to think about this more metaphorically? Nope, you can't do that. I realized like that's not part of the religion that you're being taught. And so I ended up developing kind of like this double perspective on God. I had my own personal perspective on God, and then there was this religious perspective on God. And so that was kind of the foundation of everything else that happened later. It was like just kind of having these two different thought processes in my mind. Because when I was 17 years old, I was praying to God personally in my heart, like, what can I do? How can I do good in this world? It was like the most sincere prayer that I could possibly utter. And it was in my mind, and I was just sitting there praying in my room, like, God, what can I do? How can I do good in this world? I feel like I've had a pretty good life, a pretty good childhood. How can I pay it forward? Like, how can I spend my time in this world to actually do good? I was asking for moral direction, like morality directly from God, because my religion and all of that was nice, but at the same time, I wanted direction directly from God. And so the next day, I had this thing called a patriarchal blessing in my church, and I was expecting to get some kind of answer, some kind of direction from God. I was going to the patriarch and I was asking for this direction from God in my heart. And while I was at the patriarch, he was giving me a blessing. You know, he put his hands on my head, just like Israel did in the Bible. You know, it's patterned after the Bible. And so he started talking, and immediately he said, continue the field of medicine. This will be an influence on your life. Like, this counsel that I'm giving you is going to influence your life. Continue the field of medicine specifically. He used the word specifically. And when he said that, I was like, whoa, did God just answer my prayer? Like, I was praying in my heart the day before, silently to God. And then the next day I show up, and immediately this guy starts telling me what to do for my career and how to spend my time in life. And I perceived that in my mind at the time, 17-year-old kid. I was like, how did he know what was in my mind? How did he know what I was thinking about? And like, that was like weighing on my heart at that time. It was like, how did he see me and understand what was in my soul at the same time? Because we had never talked about that. I never mentioned it to him. He just immediately started speaking as though he was answering the prayer from the day before. So from a scientific perspective, from an atheist perspective, it was a coincidence, right? It was like, okay, so you prayed the day before about something, and then the next day he answered that same thing. It was a coincidence. But when you're 17 and your whole life, everyone around you in your environment, everybody is telling you God answers prayers, God answers prayers, God answers prayers. In my mind, I was like, whoa, God just answered my prayer. I don't have, a big enough experience in life to really doubt that, because everything that I've been told up to that point would validate and confirm that God just answered my prayer. I wasn't able to see any other option. And so I accepted that. It took me like 2 or 3 seconds, but I was like, okay, God just answered my prayer. God knows who I am. God knows who I am. I started thinking that in my mind, like, God knows who I am. This is crazy. And I had a little bit of fear at the time. I was like, what is going on? But I just was like settling into that thought. What is going on? I guess God knows who I am. I was like listening to the patriarch, and he kept talking, and he kept, giving the blessing. And this is the most impactful moment of my entire life. He had his hands on my head, and I was sitting there thinking about the idea that God knows me, and I was listening to his words. It felt like his voice faded away, and what replaced his voice was light. It was timelessness. I don't know how perfectly to describe it, but it was like I was somewhere else psychologically. It was almost like I was with a bigger perspective. I was with something that was expanding. I was with something that was bigger than time. I was with something inexplainable. I was with a light that felt like eternity. It was a light that felt like eternity. That's the best way I can describe it. And so some people might say, oh, well, that was Satan. Satan appeared to you as an angel of light, but it was a light that was endless. And so if it's an endless light, it's endlessly shining, endlessly righteous. I don't see how that could be anything negative. If it was just light and it was not endless, okay, that could be something negative. But if it's light and it's endless, it's light and it keeps going forever and ever and ever, to me, that's God. To me, what else is God if it's not endless, if it's not timeless, if it's not omnipotent? It was like a light that's just, there's no way to confine it. There's no way to describe it in images. There's no way to even, there's no way that I can possibly express using words what that was like. So it's always going to be my own personal experience. And that is a sad part of this experience, is I can never adequately put it into words in a way that will allow me to connect with another human being with this experience. So whatever resonates with you about God, about science, about life, that's never going to resonate with me perfectly. And whatever resonates with me is never going to resonate with you perfectly unless you have this same experience. And so I've been looking for people that have had this experience. I've been reading, searching, and in my opinion, there's not many people that have had this experience. Many people have had subconscious experience. Many people have had drug experiences. Many people have had kind of these near-death experiences. But what I'm talking about is an endless experience. It's something that never ends. It's still with me. And when I'm in this level of consciousness that I'm in right now, I still know that that exists. I still know that that is more real than this. It's like, this is the dream. That was real. This is a dream compared to that. So whenever you're dreaming and you wake up and then you go back to dreaming again, that's what it feels like for me right now. I feel like I'm back in my dream, because when I woke up, that was reality. That was beyond anything that I can possibly describe or experience in this world. And it was real to me. So it's like I feel alone. I feel stuck almost. It's like I'm trying to describe something and I can't resonate with anybody. And so it's painful. It's like I'm painfully alone in this world. That's how I best can describe it at this point, because I can't resonate with anybody. And so what I've tried to do is I've tried to find other examples and other people that can kind of resonate with this endlessness, this light that never ends, this void in time, this redemptive and infinite light. And so what I just wish I could describe it better, but there's always a point. There's always a point where I have to just say, I'm alone. Like, I'm alone. I'm not going to be able to describe it. So that frustration of not being able to resonate with people, I guess that is kind of what has led me to search out for other different religions and different ways of looking at the world. And eventually, I found Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, in Buddhism. And when I started reading his story and some of the things that people said that he said, I felt like he had the same experience. I was like, okay, that guy, something was going on with that guy. Something was in his mind. He had some kind of experience that was endless, and it was righteous, and it was good. And the way he talks about it, or the way that people say he talked about it, it resonates with me, because he would say things like, I have been to the Brahma world. I was born within the Brahma world. And they were like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, why would you listen to anybody that has never been there? Why would you say that God is unknown? Why would you listen to a teacher that says God is unknown? And so he knew God in some way. He was like, he knew that there was some kind of escape, I guess, from this current state of consciousness. And then, so that was Buddha, and a lot of the things he talked about, there was a morality to it. There was a realness to it. So a lot of these druggies, these people that rely on drugs to like get to a different wavelength as they describe it, they have no morality associated with what they're talking about. They don't develop a system of life, a system of morality. It's more of like they just have this trip, they see some kind of creature, they have some kind of experience, and then they're just kind of back. And in my opinion, they're almost like less moral. They have less faith because they have this crutch. And they always think that they can rely on this crutch to see God instead of actually being a good person. So instead of actually trying to do good, which I think was the step in my life that I feel like was also in Buddha's life, trying to do good, which was the level that actually went to the highest plane of existence. I don't think it was trying to have an experience. There was no effort involved of like, hey, I want to have this experience. I want to go to this wavelength. No, it was just like, I want to do good in my life. And then God actually takes you to that experience from that level. He takes over. So I feel like with drugs, it's a way that you're trying to control the experience, which takes the experience away because you're not in control of it. So yeah, drugs, that's an anti-faith experience in my opinion. And I feel like it's, if there is such thing as a devil, like that metaphor, that metaphor of Satan or the metaphor of the devil, I would put drugs in that category because it's anti-good. It's anti-faith. You want to have faith and you want to try to do good. You want to be praying with your whole soul in that direction of like morality. And like, that's not drugs. Morality is not a drug. So no, drugs, bad. Buddha, good, is what I'm trying to say. The way that Buddha was going about it, he had a religious system in place that taught people, how to be a good person. And it wasn't just, oh, go take this drug and then you're going to reach nirvana. That was not the point. That's a fake form of the real experience. And so anybody that advocates drugs, in my opinion, is so evil because they're taking God and they're taking morality out of the equation, and they're just saying, hey, go play with the synapses in your body a little bit and you can reach the same level. Nope. This is real. This is reality. You don't need drugs. This is a present reality. It's something that is in you. It's something that is already there. It's something that you don't need to go searching for. It's like you're just a good person. You're just active. You're just faithful. And that is what's going to make you closer to God. It's not some trip with your synapses and like with your biology. Nope. It's just you're there. You're present with God and you're seeing everything. There's no breakdowns. There's no variations. There's no gods. There's no forms. There's no images. It's just there. And it's just you're there. The light is you. You are the light. And there's no other way to describe it. There's no other path than just being present. So I think drugs take you away from that ability to be active and present in your own consciousness, which is a direct connection to the light. And so that's the best way I can describe seeing God. It's a light that is present and it's a light that feels like eternity. That's how I would think about it if you want a particular description of God. So after that moment happened, it was like maybe 1 or 2 minutes. I don't really know exactly how long because I came back to the dream that we call reality, this mirage that we call reality, or this subconscious experience that we call consciousness. And at that point, I remember kind of being out of breath. I was like, what is going on here? And I stood up. I tried to say thank you, like thank you for whatever we're doing here. I wanted to express that, this was a spiritual experience. This was something positive. I was just like kind of in shock. And when I tried to say thank you, I was out of breath. That was one of the weirdest things to me after that experience, is like, why am I out of breath? In a way I can't describe. It just weirded me out. Like, whoa, this is so weird. Got in the car with my parents. We drove home, and on the way home, I remember looking out at the trees outside of the car, and I remember seeing those trees and the leaves were kind of blowing in the wind, and I remember thinking to myself, like, this is so artificial. These are not real trees. This is not real nature. My mind was like still wanting to go back to that previous experience of like being in that higher level of consciousness, and I was disappointed in the trees. I was like, why do I have to be here with these artificial trees? I kind of had this idea of, I'm going to go back there. That was a timeless, eternal thing that I was experiencing. Like, that is so far beyond what I'm experiencing right now. This is just going to feel like just like a blink of an eye, just a millisecond, and I'm going to be back in that place. That is kind of the feeling I had. That was the intuition that I had in my body at that time. That was one of the main intuitions. And I had other intuitions. So it was like my whole emotional structure had changed, because I started feeling these things like my wife or my ideal partner, like someone who I want to be with in my life, whoever that is not on this continent. Why am I feeling this? I felt like whoever I want to be with is not on this continent. It was like so weird, because I wasn't thinking about that before. And so I started feeling like I got to find my wife, or I got to find my ideal partner on some other continent. It was like, it's just going to be somewhere else. It was just like this weird intuition that I had. And so another intuition I had is we went back to the church, the regular Mormon LDS church. And I remember looking around, we did the ceremonies, like the sacrament, and like, the regular everyday Sunday school type of stuff. I was like, this is kind of an interesting way of going about it. We're trying to get closer to God, but this is not God. Like, I just didn't feel the same. I was like, this is so dull. It's just so dull compared to what I just experienced. And that is kind of how I see every religion at this point. I'm like, it's just so dull. It's like trying. It's good. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's evil. I don't hate Mormonism. I don't hate the LDS Church. I actually love the culture that I grew up in. I think it's a really good culture. If you're looking for good outcomes, if you're looking for something that works, I would say the LDS religion pretty much works. We had a lot of good things in our community, a lot of trustworthy people that you could rely on, that kind of thing. And, it was a good community to grow up in. I had a great childhood. And so I have no problem with the LDS Church. I think it's a decent religion, and it's just as good as other religions. And, it's a religion. There's not really much else to say about it, but, it was good. And it just was kind of dull after that. I had this intuition that like, this is not it compared to what I experienced. I kind of want to go experience the real thing, and so those are kind of the intuitions that I had. And then I also had this like random intuition that I was connected to music. I don't know how else to describe it, but like deep down, even though I'm not very talented, I totally admit that, I don't have a really great voice. But I just had like this connection to music. And so over the next 14 years, these intuitions were kind of just there in my body, and they started like being relevant. 14 years later, I actually met somebody on a different continent, and it was like a serendipitous moment in my life. I was expecting to find love for so many years, and I was trying to, find love in my life, and it just wasn't working out. And then 14 years later, I had this serendipitous moment, and it happened to be with someone who lived on a different continent than me. And I was like, whoa, that intuition, that was crazy. Like, what is going on here? I realize this sounds totally crazy, but it was like, something was real about that intuition, because I found my ideal partner. I found somebody that is just like perfect for me on a different continent. And then I started learning over those 14 years, like the logical reasons why my own religion wasn't as dynamic as the real experience that I had. I had no idea why I had that intuition when I was 17 years old. But, later in my life, I was like, yeah, I can kind of see why I had that intuition about my own religion. I kind of started to realize a lot of those like anti-Mormonism ideas, there was something to them. I'm not saying I'm an anti-Mormon. I'm not that way. I don't really go down like that anti-Mormon pathway in my thoughts. I'm more focused on my own experience rather than their anti-experience, right? But I can kind of see where they're coming from, I can see their perspective. It's valid, just as valid as a Mormon perspective. I think they're both valid. And so I kind of started to develop like a logical reason and like more experience to describe my initial intuition. And then over the years, I kind of started to realize like Mother Nature isn't that great. And, you have hurricanes on one side of the world, you have sunshine on the other side. What's so great about that? It's not lovely, it's not divine, just kind of this feeling that we're kind of in this like evil, dark world. That intuition, it just all kind of started to make sense over those next 14, 15 years. And I started to realize that experience that I had in my own mind, my own personal experience, and those changes that happened in my body, those changes that happened in my emotions, those were real. I realized this isn't a scientific study. In order to have like a scientific consensus, you need hundreds or thousands of studies. You need to bring that into like a meta-analysis of all these different pieces of evidence. That's never going to happen with my story. I'm just one person. This is just a case study. I'm just putting it out there. These emotions and these intuitions that were in my body after this experience, it was more than a dream. It was more than just, going into my own mind and then just like waking up. It was like there was some higher awareness to it. It wasn't like a temporary break from my own consciousness. It was like, it was my own consciousness, but at a higher level, which felt like eternity to me. So yeah, I saw God. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, I saw God. That is my personal experience. No one's ever going to believe me, but I know deep down that it was real. And then I had these intuitions and these emotions that developed in my body that eventually I was able to support with logic and experiences over the course of my, next 14, 15 years in my life. There's no way I can disbelieve in that experience. It's real to me. It's legitimate to me. It's valid to me. Of course it's not valid to you because you are not me and I am not you. I'm just putting my own experience out there. I saw God in that moment. I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to force you to believe me. I'm just sharing my own perception of what happened to me. It's just a case study. It's not evidence. It's not a scientific study. It's not a meta-analysis. It's almost nothing. It's a case study. I'm just putting it out there, right? In case you're interested. And so that is my experience with seeing God. I'm going to return. I'm going to be in that state of consciousness again. I know that for me, those are my intuitions. They might not be relevant to you, but that is my experience. So I saw God. But the problem with this is that I ended up having another experience that most people, I think probably everybody who has this conviction of God, does not have. I have a conviction, or I have an experience also with evil. Because what happened to me is that I took the patriarch's advice. Before this experience, he told me to go into medicine. I took that advice as literal. When I got back to my, normal life, I kept going to school. I asked my parents, like, what happened during that experience? And they both were like, yeah, it was a really spiritual experience. So they felt the spirit. They felt something. That's like a way that we describe it in Mormonism. When you feel like the presence of God or something, you feel like connected to other people, you say that you feel the spirit. And so they were like, yeah, we felt the spirit. Something really amazing happened, but, they didn't really have the exact, window, I feel like, into eternity that I had. I had a window into eternity. They felt the spirit. So when I was back in my regular life, I actually had to go back and read the blessing that the patriarch gave me. He gave me a written copy of the blessing, and I went back and I read it because I wasn't there. I was like, I got to go read my blessing and see what he told me. And so I read it again. He told me to go into medicine. And then, at the second part of the blessing, when I wasn't really there, he kept talking about normal religious stuff, like say your prayers, go to church, that kind of thing. And so I was like, okay, I don't remember him saying that. I was somewhere else. I was with God. And so what one do I believe, right? Do I believe the written stuff here, or do I believe God? And so I ended up believing both. I'm like, well, I have two forms of communication from God in my brain. I have this written copy of the blessing, from the patriarch's words, and I also have my own personal experience. But now that I'm back in my life, I'm going to school again, I have to decide where to go to college. I had a 4-year full tuition scholarship as well. I was doing really well academically. Academics has never been a problem for me. Even when I was in medical school, academics has always been easy for me. So I was reading this blessing, go into medicine specifically. I was like, oh, I can do that. And so I believed that God was telling me to go into medicine. That was like two different things that I felt like God had communicated to me. One, go into medicine. The other, I had all these intuitions in my body about actually seeing God, right? But when you're 17 years old, you're going to rely on the culture. You're going to rely on the religion that you're growing up in. And so I kind of tended to rely more on the patriarchal blessing, the written copy of the blessing. Because that other thing that happened, I didn't know what that was. I couldn't describe it. I tried to describe it, but I didn't have words. All I had was the words that were on this patriarchal blessing. Those were the most coherent words that I had. And, I had all the religious upbringing. I had all the people in my religion that knew what that was. They know what a patriarchal blessing is. They know what the field of medicine is. And so that was the more tangible answer, I felt like, from God. And so over the next 8 years, I devoted myself basically to being a very good LDS person, a Mormon. I was in the LDS church. I was trying to follow my patriarchal blessing, and I was going into medicine, which was different than other Mormons. They don't change their career based on this patriarchal blessing. That was a unique thing that I did. I changed my career. I changed the industry that I was going to go into just based on the Mormon blessing, right? So that was another weird thing that happened to me, a weird thing that I did based on faith in my religion that other people around me weren't doing. So I had these two really weird things going on in my life. One, I was going into medicine based on the religion, changing my career path based on a religion. And the other, I had this like secret experience with God, that I felt like I had seen God. So those both were in my mind, in my body at that time. And so 8 years later, after using my 4-year full tuition scholarship, after going into medicine and doing really well academically, 2 years into medical school is when I lost faith in the religious side of that experience. I lost faith in Mormonism. I lost faith in the LDS patriarchal blessing because I couldn't be a doctor. I physically couldn't be a doctor. My personality was not ready to be a doctor. I had no context for how to be a doctor. I was going off of faith. And so when I got into the clinic, after the academic years, I got into the clinic and I started having to interact with patients. I had a horrible realization. I had this realization that I had just wasted 8 years of potential, of academic potential. I felt like I had been duped. I called the patriarch and I asked him, why did you tell me to do this? This is not working. I can't keep doing this. I'm a terrible clinician. The academics was great. I was doing fine. It was all great up until I got to the clinic and I actually had to face patients face to face. And I realized what I'm doing is not good. I can't help these people. They need a real doctor. They need somebody that is in this field, not based on faith. And so I became an atheist in that regard. I was like, this faith that I put in this religion, this faith that I put in this blessing, ended up being a very negative thing in my career. It was a horrible mistake on my part. It was a mistake. I completely admit it. I made a dumb 8-year mistake. I went into medicine based on a religious blessing. And I was devastated. I lost my faith. I lost my faith in God. So I knew that I had an experience with God, but I lost my faith that he cared. He didn't care. It was like, okay, I saw God. God doesn't care. It was okay. I saw some kind of light, some kind of eternity. But that, whatever that eternal thing is, whatever that eternal perspective is, it doesn't care about me right now. In that moment, 8 years after I had dedicated my life to this religious perspective, I became an atheist regarding religion. I became an atheist regarding morality. Yeah, I saw God. That doesn't mean God is good. That doesn't mean God is moral. That doesn't mean God is important to me. That doesn't mean God is willing to help me. I felt abandoned. I felt like he was tricking me. I felt like God's angels were laughing at me somehow. I was like, something is really messed up here. I started looking around in the world And I saw other people who were in much worse experiences than me, who were more abandoned by God than me. And I started relating to them. And I realized God is abandoning a lot of people in this world. Just doesn't care. And so I stopped buying into the religious apologetics for God's morality, because they would say things like, well, God has to allow evil to happen because of free agency. But he's giving free agency to the evil. And then the evil is taking free agency away from the non-evil. By giving everybody free agency, you're favoring evil. I lost faith in my religion. I lost faith in the religious explanation of God. I knew I had an experience with God. I wasn't denying that in my mind. I was like, yeah, I saw God. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, that happened to me, But why does it matter? Why does that experience with God even matter if it's not helping people here, if it's abandoning us in this world? So it's real, but it abandons us? And that is where I became totally unrelatable to everybody, because I knew it was real. Just like all the religious people, just like all the faithful people who believe in God, I was kind of on your side. I was like, yeah, I know it's real. I had a real experience with God. But then on the atheist side, they were like, why would you believe in God if he just abandons us? Like, if he's just not here, it doesn't make sense to believe in it. And I was like, yeah, you're right. You're both right. And I am completely weird at this point because none of you can relate to what I saw. I had both experiences. I saw God, but I've also seen evil. I saw God, but I've seen God abandon us. So I had both. I had both experiences, and I can say you're all right. Everybody's right. The people who believe in God are right. Yeah, there is a God. The people who don't believe in God, yeah, they're right. God abandoned us. I was at rock bottom on this issue. I was like, there's nowhere else to go. Everybody is right and everybody is wrong. I have nowhere else to go. Like, I was just completely alone. And so I started reaching out, trying to learn as much as I could, and because I had no other choice. And so that's when I came up with this method of trying to find faith. I was like, okay, I'm going to look for anything that is more than 1,000 years old. So something that is timeless. I'm going to look for anything that over 1 billion people can relate to, because that's kind of omnipresent in a way, not perfectly omnipresent, but it's something that is very omnipresent. If 1 billion people can relate to it, it's psychologically present. And then if we take all of those things and we find out what they have in common, then that suggests that those things are effective, or those ideas are effective, because if all of these different perspectives have something in common, that indicates that it's probably pretty effective, because it's there. It's present in all these different situations and all these different cultures, so it must be kind of effective. So I started searching for morality that is at least 1,000 years old, at least 1 billion people can relate to it, and then it's common in all of these different sources, or all of these different situations that are at least 1,000 years old and at least 1 billion people can relate to. So time, frequency, and commonality. That was my method of searching for morality. The sources of morality, or the sources of moral thinking that I feel like meet my conditions, were Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Egyptian religion, and Socratic philosophy. These are 7 sources of morality, 7 sources of philosophy that I took into account while I was searching for my morality. And so I was searching for my own philosophy, my own way of life. I was searching for something good that I could put my faith into again. And so that is where I came up with this idea of the first faith. It was like, if I find this faith, these things that we all think are good, something that's transcendent. Before humans were humans, this thing, this light, this morality, this faith, this idea that is good, this morality of God that transcends time, that must have been present as far back as we can think, as far back as we can even imagine. So that is the idea of the first faith. It's the first imaginable faith. It's the first comprehensible faith to a human being. It's the first interaction with God from a human perspective. So it's the first faith. It's a hypothesis. It's a case study. I'm not saying this is a scientific fact. This is the first faith factually. I'm saying this is the first faith in my point of view. This is what worked for me. After I developed this faith, I actually started implementing these steps in my life, implementing these ideas, these conditions of morality in my own life, and my life improved. I became happy. I wasn't angry at God anymore. I was just like, you know what? We got to move forward. These are the steps I'm going to take, and someday I'll know. Someday things are going to change. I have faith in God's morality. I don't know for sure. This is my faith. It's just a faith. I don't know. It's not science. I don't know. But it's faith. I think religion is good because it works for a lot of people. But atheism, that kind of works for a lot of people as well. When all these other religions don't work, atheism seems to work. So I kind of think you have to have both, the religious perspective, the faith, as well as the science. So, for example, when you're with your family and you have a gun in your house, and you're with your kids, you're with your wife, you're with, people that you love, you're supposed to treat the gun as if it were loaded, right? You're supposed to say, we are all going to follow this imaginary concept that this gun is loaded. Because if we treat this gun as if it is loaded, we will not make a mistake with this gun. We are not going to accidentally fire the gun in a place where it doesn't need to be fired, where it shouldn't be fired, where it's not good to fire it. If you act as if the gun is loaded within that context, that is good. However, if you're going out hunting into the real world, or if there's an intruder in your house, you have a threat. That's a different context. At that point, you don't want to treat the gun as if it's loaded. You want to scientifically verify that the gun is loaded. And then you want to treat the gun, if it's not loaded, as if it's not loaded, and you want to put the ammo in the gun. Logically, effectively, and you want to go out and you want to be able to use the gun for its intended purpose in that other context. So this debate between science and religion, this debate between atheism and morality of God, both perspectives can be legitimate. When you're with your family, you might want to act as if certain things are true because it creates cohesiveness. It gives you a direction to follow with other people. It helps you communicate in a context where you're trying to figure out what is morality, what is good, what is our higher purpose. It's good. It's good to have some kind of religious perspective. Whereas if you're out working, let's say, in the real world, you have a job to do, you can't really use your religion in that context. Like if you're a doctor, like I tried to apply my faith into being a doctor. It did not work. I was a bad doctor. I was bad at doing good. It was a failure. I failed. It was a mistake to trust that God wanted me to go down that path. I lost my faith. And so when we're out in our jobs and we're out working in the real world, I don't think we can really use faith as a foundation. We have to use scientific fact. We have to use, verifiable evidence in order to actually accomplish what we need to accomplish. But when we're with our family and when we're with our children and we're with our community and we just want to relax, we just want to spend time with people. We just want to have a good time. We just want to enjoy each other's company. We want to eat together. We want to, laugh together. We want to be entertained together. We want to play sports together and just get to know each other and just be a family. You don't necessarily have to bring in that hard scientific evidence and say that, hey, you must do things this way because this is how it is. Because it's a different context. In that context, you might want to just say, hey, let's just say the gun is loaded and let's just treat it as if it's loaded so that we can just be safe together and that we can just forget about it a little bit and that we can just spend time with each other. There's two contexts and both are real. Both are important. So I saw God, but I also lost faith. And so when I talk about the first faith, it's trying to balance these two perspectives. It's trying to say, hey, I get it. We might not have a verifiable scientific study that says that I saw God. I'm not going to tell you you have to follow my faith, my version of faith on a scientific level. That's not the point. You have your own experience. It's not a scientific fact. But at the same time, I'm going to put my story out there. I'm going to put my faith out there because it works for me. It's a case study. And so if you're alone and you don't have another religion and you're just, sad, depressed, you don't know where God is, you don't know what's going on, you're angry at God maybe, you can use my faith. There's 7 ethics that are timeless, omnipresent, and common to all religions. And these are the ethics that work for me. And I hope they work for you. That's all I'm saying. This might save you a lot of time from searching all these different religions. Because I searched it. I did it for you. And I came up with a very cohesive, organized set of ethics for you that I think will work. That I think could work for you. Because I know they worked for me. So I'm just going to put it out there. And if you want to use this faith while you're with your family, while you're with your friends, so that you don't have to think about it so much, so that you can just be happy, so that you can just enjoy other people's company. When you're with a Muslim, just enjoy being with that person. When you're with a Christian, just enjoy being with a Christian. When you're with somebody from an Eastern religion, Hinduism, Buddhism, you can understand them better and you can just enjoy being in their company. That's the whole idea with this faith. I'm not saying it's a scientific fact. I'm just saying it might be helpful in a certain context. When you're just trying to get along with people, it might be really helpful. And so I wish you the best, and I will talk to you later.